All right, so are you ready to dive deep, like seriously deep, into some heavy philosophical waters? We're talking moral epistemology today, and you've given us this huge pile of sources all wrestling with this question: how do we know what's right and wrong? Like, actually know. Is that even possible?
It really is a question that gets at, the core of how we see ourselves, our place in the world. I
Hmm?
mean, can we prove our moral ideas the same way we'd prove something in science? Or is moral knowledge different somehow? And your sources, they jump right into all that cultural clashes, what makes a moral fact, the whole thing.
And we're kicking things off with something that's probably, I bet, familiar to anyone who's ever had like a real argument about ethics. This sociological puzzle, as they call it, of moral disagreement. I mean, we all know people disagree about what's right, what's wrong, even when they seem to have the same facts in front of them. Cultures clash, everyone's yelling, and it's like, are we even speaking the same language? Does that mean it's all just personal taste? Like you like blue, I like red,
Yeah.
end of story?
Yeah, it's really tempting to go there, isn't it? Just say everyone's got their own truth. But just because people disagree doesn't mean there isn't an answer, right? Think of it this way. You could have folks arguing over how to solve some tough equation, but that doesn't mean there isn't a right answer out there. Philosophers have this idea of inference to the best explanation. It's kind of being a detective, right? You examine the evidence, all the different arguments people are making, their points of view, and you try to figure out which explanation fits best with all of it. So yeah, people fight about morality, but does that really mean we can't know anything for sure? Not so fast.
And our sources also get into this idea called moral relativism, right?
Yeah.
Which basically says what's right or wrong depends on where you come from, your background. So maybe everyone's right, but only relative to their own little world. But hold on, doesn't that just create more problems? Logically, I mean.
On the surface, moral relativism, it seems like a nice way to avoid fights. Like, everyone just do your thing, no judgment. But then you run smack into some big philosophical walls. Classic example. Veiling of women. Some cultures, it's seen as morally right. Others, it's seen as oppressive and wrong. So if we say both sides are right, but just in their own context, aren't we basically saying they're not really disagreeing at all? Like they're just talking about different things.
Yeah.
And that doesn't feel right, does it? Like it misses the point of the conflict entirely.
It's like they're speaking different languages, but it's clear they're both talking about the same issue. And there's this real clash of values happening.
Right, exactly. Which leads us to this important question. If it's not just culture, what else is going on here? Why these disagreements? Could it be we're actually arguing about different things that just seem moral? Like maybe we disagree about the facts or how to interpret them or even which values we should prioritize when we make a judgment. It's messy.
It's like two people looking at like an abstract painting, right?
Hmm.
They see the same color shapes, but what they take away from it, their gut reaction, could be totally different. Now, our sources also go into this fascinating link between like morality and what makes us act. David Hume, one of the philosophers we're looking at, he had some strong thoughts on this. He said that morals, they kind of force us to act a certain way, but
Yeah.
can facts really do that? He's got this famous line, I might butcher it, but it's basically like, it's not crazy to prefer the whole world getting destroyed over you just scratching your finger.
Oh, yeah. Hume's argument is a classic. And that quote, it really nails the point, doesn't it? He's saying, hey, wait a minute. Moral judgments aren't just beliefs about facts, because if they were, why would they have this power to make us do stuff? Sometimes even against our own interests. To break it down simply, Hume's saying, if morals are just beliefs, and beliefs alone can't make you act, then morals can't be just beliefs.
Okay, so what is making us do those good or bad things then? Is Hume saying emotions are calling the shots when it comes to morality?
Well, Hume's work, it kicked off this whole debate between two camps, internalists and externalists. The internalists, they say that the drive to act is built into moral judgments. Like, it's a package deal. You can't say, this is wrong, without also feeling some aversion to doing it. For them, the motivation and the judgment, they're inseparable.
That makes sense. But what about those people, you know the type, who say one thing and do another? Like, they're all about ethics, but then their actions, not so much.
Yeah, the hypocrisy factor. That's a classic counterpoint. Philosophers like to use the utilitarian who doesn't care example. So imagine someone who totally gets utilitarianism, like intellectually they're on board with maximizing happiness for everyone, but they just don't feel any urge to actually do it. It's like their heart isn't in it. And that throws a wrench into the internalist idea that a moral judgment equals automatic action.
Okay, so that's where the externalists come in. How do they connect morality and actually doing stuff?
Right, so for them, the push to act morally, it's not like built into the judgment itself. They say it's learned, you
Yeah.
know? shaped by how you were raised, social stuff, all that. Think about how kids learn about right and wrong. It's not some logic puzzle, right?
Mhm.
It's all about feeling good when you get praised, bad when you're punished. We're taught to react to certain actions in certain ways, and those feelings then end up guiding how we behave.
So it's like we're building this moral compass over time,
Yeah.
but it's based on, like, the emotional landscape we grew up in.
Right.
Interesting. But hey, our sources, they don't stop there. They take us even deeper down the rabbit hole asking, do moral facts even exist? Now that's getting meta, right?
Oh, yeah. That question has kept philosophers busy for like forever. I mean, how can you know something if you're not even sure it's a real thing? It's like trying to find something on a map that might not even be on there. So your sources lay out three main contenders for what moral facts could be based on: the natural world, the non-natural, and good old theological stuff.
Okay, a lot to unpack there. Let's start with the God angle. Is morality ultimately about what God wants, his commands?
That's been a popular idea for sure. Problem is, you run into this thing called the Euthyphro dilemma. So is something good because God commands it, or does God command it because it's already good? If it's the first one, then God's will seems totally random, like flipping a coin for right and wrong. But if it's the second one, then, well, we're back to where we started. What makes something good in the first place, aside from God? Turns out, divine authority doesn't solve everything.
Mhm. So maybe God's not the answer here. What about those non-natural facts? What are they, and how do they fit into this whole morality puzzle?
Yeah, the non-natural stuff, it's a bit trickier. It's not supernatural like ghosts and stuff, but it's also not part of the world science studies, the stuff you can measure. It's like saying there's this realm of moral truths. You can't see them, touch them, but somehow you just know them intuitively.
Like some kind of moral sixth sense.
Yeah, exactly. And philosophers talk about this as a priori knowledge stuff, without needing experience to prove it. Like, think about math. 2 plus 2 equals 4. You don't got to go experiment to prove that. It just is. Some folks think moral knowledge works the same way.
We just see these moral truths. Were there any famous philosophers who actually believed that?
Oh, yeah, big names.
Yeah.
Henry Sidgwick, for example, he was all about utilitarianism, thought we could just grasp that idea of maximizing happiness, like it was a basic moral truth. And then there's Immanuel Kant, deontology guy, all about treating others as ends in themselves, never just using them. That was his a priori principle.
So for them, morality boils down to these like fundamental principles that are just self-evident. But hold on, real life is messy,
Yeah.
right? Do these grand principles really cover every sticky situation we run into?
Good point. And that leads us to a different view called moral particularism. This one says that we get a sense of right and wrong for specific actions without needing some big overarching rule. It's about looking at each situation, all the little details, the relationships involved, and then you kind of have a direct moral sense of what's the right move in that case.
But doesn't that make moral knowledge super subjective? If everyone's just going with their gut, how can we ever agree?
That's one of the main criticisms thrown at intuitionism, yeah. And there's also the problem of learning. We clearly learn moral rules, right? Through trial and error, people teaching us, seeing what happens when others mess up. Doesn't that clash with the idea that we're born with this intuition?
It's like saying we're born knowing how to play piano, even though it takes like years of practice to actually get good.
Right. Exactly. But those who believe in moral intuition, they have a comeback for that. They compare it to learning math. You start with easy stuff, counting, basic operations. But eventually you get to these abstract truths that go way beyond those first examples. Same with morality, maybe. We learn through concrete stuff, but then develop this intuition for deeper truths that go beyond those specific situations.
So, like, we're training our moral intuition moving from this simple stuff to bigger principles. Okay, but even if we buy that, there are still those who think moral knowledge is possible, but not through this special intuition. What about them?
Right, and that brings us to moral naturalism, which grounds moral knowledge in the material world, no separate mystical stuff. For naturalists, morality is just part of the natural world, like gravity or trees growing.
So no need for that moral sixth sense. It's all about observing, studying the world around us.
Precisely. But there are actually two main flavors of moral naturalism. The first one says that moral properties are identical to complex natural properties, stuff you could describe with science, like that classic utilitarian idea. Right actions lead to the most happiness, and happiness can, at least in theory, be measured by pleasure and pain. So for these folks, moral rightness is about maximizing pleasure over pain, a property that's totally grounded in the natural world.
So it's like saying moral rightness is just the chemical formula for happiness.
In a way, yeah. But the second type of naturalism is a little more subtle. It agrees that moral facts are natural, but says we can't just reduce them to simple scientific terms. They're natural, but not reducible. They supervene on other natural facts. It's like saying moral facts emerge from complex interactions in the world, but they're not identical to any single physical thing.
So, like, a symphony is more than just the notes played by each instrument. It's the way they're arranged, the feeling it creates, something more than just sound waves.
Exactly. And this avoids a common problem with naturalism. If moral facts are just complex natural facts, why even bother with the label moral? Doesn't science cover it all? But if moral facts are emergent, then they do have a special way of explaining things, like human behavior and how societies work. That goes beyond just physical stuff.
Okay, so even with all these attempts to root morality in the real world, there are still those who say, nope, we can't know this stuff for sure. Our sources highlight Immanuel Kant, who had serious doubts about whether experience can truly teach us right from wrong.
Oh, yeah. Kant was a big critic of basing ethics on just experience. He said, to really know something morally, you need general truths, these universal principles that apply to everyone. But he said our experiences only give us specific examples, one-off cases. So how do you bridge that gap, he asked, without assuming we're born with some moral knowledge already?
It's like saying you can't learn grammar just by reading a bunch of sentences. You need some deeper understanding of how language works to make sense of it.
Right. Kant's saying there's a limit to basing moral knowledge on just what we see. But some philosophers push back on that. They say, hey, modern science doesn't just go around making simple generalizations from what it observes. Science uses background info, theories, and this thing called inference to the best explanation, picking the explanation that makes the most sense given all the evidence. Maybe moral reasoning can do that too, letting us go from specific examples to bigger moral ideas.
So it's like detectives don't just randomly gather clues. They use what they know about crime, how people think, to build a whole picture of what happened. Maybe moral reasoning works kind of like that, using our understanding of human nature and values to figure out those tricky moral dilemmas. So maybe we can use like fancier reasoning to connect our experiences to these big moral principles. But even if we get past that, there's another big challenge to moral naturalism. We got to deal with the naturalistic fallacy. Our sources spend a good chunk of time on this one.
Ah, yes, good old G.E. Moore. He famously argued that you just can't equate good with any natural property, no matter how complicated or well-defined it is. And he used this thing called the open question argument to prove his point. Basically, no matter how you define good, pleasure, happiness, whatever, you can always still ask, but is that really good? And the fact that that question always makes sense, Moore said, shows that good is something special, something that can't be reduced to just the physical world.
It's like you could describe a delicious cake, right?
Yeah.
When you talk about the ingredients, how soft it is, how sweet it is. You can even break down its chemical composition. But you can still ask, yeah, but is it good? Maybe you're on a diet. Maybe you just hate cake. That goodness seems separate from just the physical stuff.
Exactly. So Moore's argument, it was a real headache for some types of moral naturalism, especially those that relied only on analyzing concepts to define good. But a lot of modern naturalists, they say Moore was attacking like a simplified version, a straw man. They point out that they use actual evidence, scientific studies, to back up their claims about how moral stuff connects to the natural world.
So it's like saying, look, we can actually study how kindness affects the brain, how cooperation benefits society, and use that to argue that these things are good, not just because we feel like they are.
Right, that's a key part of the debate. And, our sources don't stop at these classic philosophical arguments. They bring up some really interesting challenges that come from thinking about how morality evolved. Like, if our morals are just a product of natural selection, helping us survive and reproduce, does that mean they're not actually true?
So, like, if our sense of fairness just evolved because it helps us get along in groups, does that mean fairness is just a useful trick, not a real thing?
That's the core of the evolutionary debunking argument, yeah. It basically suggests that explaining morality through Darwin might actually clash with the idea that our moral beliefs are objectively true. There are a few versions of this argument, each raising its own unique set of challenges to the idea of moral knowledge.
Let's break those down then. First up, there's this argument from parsimony, clarity, and non-circularity. What's that all about? It sounds kind of complicated.
It's basically saying that the evolutionary explanation for morality is just simpler, more straightforward, and scientifically better than those that rely on some objective moral truth. Like, we don't need to invent some mysterious moral realm or special intuition if we can explain things like helping our family or cooperating through natural selection, which we already know is a thing.
So it's like Occam's razor, right? The simplest explanation is usually the best. But doesn't this assume that moral beliefs aren't about objective truths in the first place?
You got it. That's a core assumption, yeah. But remember how we talked about moral naturalism that tries to square the evolutionary origins of morality with the idea that moral truths are objective? Like, if moral properties are rooted in the natural world, then maybe natural selection favored those who were tuned into these properties, those who acted in ways that were good for everyone.
So those who are naturally inclined to be fair would be more likely to thrive in groups and pass on those fairness genes. But wouldn't that make moral knowledge just another type of knowledge about the world, like physics or biology?
That's one way to look at it, yeah. But there's another version of the debunking argument that specifically targets moral objectivism. This one says, even if we accept that our moral beliefs have a biological basis, they can't be objective in the strong sense that many philosophers demand.
So it's not enough for moral truths to just be real. They also have to be completely independent of what we believe or want, almost like those Platonic forms, outside of time and space.
Yeah, exactly. Sharon Street, a philosopher who writes about this a lot, she argues that if evolution shaped our moral beliefs, and evolution is all about adapting to specific environments and challenges, then those beliefs can't be truly stance independent. Meaning, if humans had evolved differently, our morals would probably be totally different, and that throws a wrench in the whole objective truth thing.
So if we were more like ants or bees, our moral systems would probably be all about the hive mind, not individual rights and stuff.
Right. So it's a tough question for those defending moral knowledge. Can you have this strong version of moral objectivism, AE, except that morality evolved?
Sounds like a real philosophical pickle. Do we have to choose between Darwin and objective morality? Or is there some middle ground?
Well, some philosophers are trying to find a way to have both. They say maybe we need to relax our definition of stance independence a little. Like, perhaps moral truths can be objective in a less strict way, reflecting some universal parts of human experience or stuff that any society needs to function, even if they're not totally separate from our evolutionary past.
So even though different cultures have different moral codes, there might be some shared ground rules, things that every society needs to survive. Okay, our sources bring up one last debunking argument we should probably touch on. This one gets into emotions and moral judgment, something we talked about earlier.
Right, right. This one draws on research from psychology and neuroscience. The idea is that our moral judgments are often driven by these unconscious, automatic processes heavily influenced by emotions. There's this dual process model of the brain, which says we have two systems at work. System 1, which is fast, intuitive, and emotion-driven, and System 2, which is slower, more deliberate, and all about conscious reasoning.
So we've got two internal moral compasses, one that's all gut feeling and the other that's more about thinking things through.
That's the idea. And the argument is that because System 1, the emotional one, is older, evolutionarily speaking, and less rational, it can't be a reliable source of moral knowledge. This casts doubt on judgments made through intuition or strong feelings, especially those linked to deontological ethics, which is all about duties and rights.
It's like our gut reactions to moral stuff might be outdated, leftovers from our caveman days that don't really apply anymore.
Yeah, that's the gist of it. But new research is showing that this sharp line between emotion and reason might not be so clear-cut. Studies are finding that emotions are important for all kinds of decision-making, even those involving complex thought processes. Think about it. Our emotions tell us what we value, what's important to us. Without that input, our reasoning would be cold, detached, and not very good at guiding our actions.
It'd be like trying to navigate a city without a map or any idea where you want to go. You could plan the most efficient route, but without a sense of direction, you're totally lost.
Perfect analogy. And emotions, they can be pretty complex and sophisticated. They reflect our experiences, our moral learning, even our unconscious understanding of how people work. To just dismiss them as irrational impulses, that's missing the whole picture.
It's like saying a great artist is just randomly splashing paint on a canvas. There's skill there, intention, a deep understanding of color and composition.
Exactly. What's important here is that even though emotions play a role in moral judgments, that doesn't automatically mean they're not a source of knowledge. Actually, they might be crucial for figuring out the messy world of morality, especially when we need to make quick decisions based on our gut.
So it's not about picking sides, reason versus emotion. It's about understanding how they work together, how each one contributes to a more complete understanding of morality.
Couldn't have said it better myself. So as we wrap up this deep dive, there's one last thought-provoking question to leave you with. If moral knowledge is possible, is it something we each figure out on our own through solo thinking and introspection? Or is it more of a social thing?
It makes me think that maybe morality is less like solving an equation and more like, I don't know, a group of people making music together. Each person brings their own instrument, their own voice, and it all comes together to make this, like, harmony.
Oh, I love that. There's a growing area of philosophy called social epistemology that focuses on just that, the communal nature of knowledge. Think about how we form our beliefs, even about everyday stuff. We trust what others tell us. We argue and discuss. We learn from experts. Knowledge, in this view, is less about being absolutely certain and more about having good reasons to believe something, reasons that are accepted within a group of people seeking truth.
So it's like even scientists, they don't just work alone in a lab. They share their work, they debate, they build upon each other's ideas to create this, like, shared understanding.
Exactly. And this social aspect might be even more important for moral knowledge. After all, morality is all about how we live together, relate to each other, how we create a just and good society. It's hard to imagine doing that without some shared understanding of right and wrong, a moral framework that's been tested and refined through conversation, disagreement, and collective experience.
It's kind of like language, right? We don't just make up our own language. We inherit it, we change it, we use it to connect with each other. Maybe morality works the same way. It's a shared legacy that we're constantly reworking and reinterpreting together.
That's a deep thought. And it leads us to one final, really challenging question to ponder. If moral knowledge is this collaborative, ever-changing thing, what does that mean for each of us? What's our individual responsibility to seek truth, to fight injustice, to make the world a better place? Something to keep those philosophical wheels turning.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. Until next time, keep questioning, keep searching, and keep those philosophical conversations going.